She had nothing, no wealth, no power, not even the safety that others take for granted. Just a poor black girl, standing in a world that constantly reminded her she didn't belong. Yet one bold promise to a powerful millionaire would change everything. It wasn't just about love, or even heartbreak, it was about dignity, justice, and the courage to speak when silence was expected. What she said shook the room, but what followed shook an entire system. Would her words heal, or expose the truth no one wanted to face? Her life had always been defined by struggle. She grew up in a small neighborhood where opportunity was rare, but dreams were still alive in the hearts of those who refused to give up. Every morning, she rose before the sun, walking through cracked sidewalks and weathered streets to her part-time job. She cleaned, served, and worked harder than anyone, yet her name was often forgotten, her presence overlooked. To most, she was invisible, just another poor black girl in a city that valued wealth and status above dignity. But she carried something the world could not see, a quiet strength, born from years of surviving in silence. She watched the wealthy glide past her in polished cars, their eyes never meeting hers. Still, she dreamed of something better, something beyond the labels placed on her from birth. It was in these ordinary days, between the struggle to survive and the yearning to be seen, that her path crossed with his, a man whose life was the opposite of hers in every way. A millionaire, admired and envied, known for power and privilege. To him, heartbreak was just another wound that money couldn't heal. To her, pain was a constant companion, but so was resilience. Their worlds should never have collided. Yet fate had its own plans. And when she finally spoke the words that would echo far beyond that moment, no one, not even she, could have imagined the storm it would unleash. She thought she knew struggle, but nothing had prepared her for the moment when the world began to test her in ways far beyond poverty. Working long shifts, enduring stares, and carrying the weight of invisibility was one thing, but soon she would come face to face with a different kind of trial, one that clawed not only at her survival but at her very identity. It began subtly. The glances she received when she entered certain places weren't new, but this time they lingered. A look that questioned why she dared to be there. A stare that reminded her she was an outsider in her own city. When she spoke, her words were met with cold politeness, often dismissed before they landed. She wasn't seen as a young woman with ambition, she was seen as a reminder of something unwanted, something society pretended to have moved past but never truly had. At work, she scrubbed floors that shined for people who would never learn her name. She carried trays to tables where laughter filled the air, and still, she was just a shadow. The wealth that passed her each day was a world she could touch but never enter. And yet, she remained, quietly resilient. Until one evening, something shifted. A request came through the restaurant, an exclusive booking. A millionaire had reserved the best table, a man whose name carried weight in every corner of the city. He was powerful, respected, envied. To many, he seemed untouchable. To her, he was just another reminder of how distant her dreams felt. Still, she worked her shift as she always did, careful, diligent, invisible. But invisibility has its limits. That night, as she passed his table, she caught fragments of his world. The way others leaned close to please him, the careful laughter, the admiration he received effortlessly. Yet behind his composed smile, there was something hollow. His eyes betrayed a kind of loneliness money could not disguise. And for the first time, she realized that the man who had everything carried a wound deeper than her own scars of poverty. Still, the world did not let her forget her place. As she returned to the kitchen, whispers followed her. Other staff muttered about her skin, her background, the way she should be grateful just to be here. It wasn't the first time, but that night it cut deeper, perhaps because she had just seen the cracks in the life of a man who was supposed to be untouchable. If he could suffer and still be adored, why was her suffering always met with silence, or worse, blame? The injustice pressed in on her like the walls of the restaurant itself. Every door she pushed through seemed to remind her, she did not belong. Yet fate has a way of placing us in rooms we were never meant to enter, forcing choices we never thought we'd make. Later that night, the unthinkable happened. She was called to bring a final tray to his table. For the first time, their eyes met fully. And in that moment, she felt something stir inside her, not admiration, not envy, but a boldness she had never allowed herself before. A question burned within her: why should his pain matter more than hers? Why should his brokenness be seen, when hers was ignored? The words she would later speak to him were not yet formed, but the spark had been lit. Still, the night didn't end in quiet reflection. No, life had more lessons waiting. As she left work, walking home through dim streets, she heard it again: footsteps. Familiar, unwelcome. She glanced back: 2 men, their laughter sharp, their pace quickening. Her chest tightened. She knew the type. Their kind of power wasn't in wealth but in cruelty. Her steps quickened, but so did theirs. Words were thrown her way, ugly words, words that tore at dignity. She pulled her coat tighter, wishing to vanish, but invisibility was not a shield that night. She crossed the street, hoping for safety, but their voices followed, each word louder, meant to remind her of what she was in their eyes: less than. She reached her door before they reached her, fumbling with shaking hands to get inside. The door slammed shut, and for a moment, silence returned. But her heart raced long after, pounding with the reminder that no matter how hard she worked, how quiet she stayed, danger followed her simply because of who she was. The next day, she carried that fear to work. She carried the exhaustion of poverty, the weight of prejudice, and the fresh sting of humiliation. And yet, when she saw the millionaire again, sitting at his table surrounded by comfort, something shifted in her. She was tired of carrying silence. Day after day, their worlds brushed against each other in small, unspoken ways. She noticed his loneliness deepen, his smile fade quicker when no one was watching. He noticed her presence too, though she didn't yet realize it. 2 lives separated by wealth but connected by wounds. And then, opportunity. One evening, a moment presented itself when no one else lingered nearby. The restaurant had quieted, the chatter had faded, and the air seemed heavy with unsaid truths. She felt her heart race, her palms tremble. Years of silence pressed against her chest, demanding release. She knew that if she spoke, she risked ridicule, even punishment. But if she stayed silent, she would remain invisible forever. So she stepped closer. This was the moment that would later echo across both their lives. The moment when a poor black girl, long ignored, would dare to confront not just a man but a system that kept people like her unseen. Her bold words were not yet spoken, but the silence before them was electric. And as she opened her mouth, time seemed to hold its breath. Because what she was about to say would not only challenge a man with everything, it would challenge a society that believed people like her had nothing to give. Would he laugh? Would he dismiss her as so many others had? Or would he finally see her, not as invisible, not as powerless, but as someone whose courage could heal even the wounds money could not touch? The answer would come soon enough. But first, the storm had to break. The air in the restaurant was unusually still. Conversations had dulled, laughter had faded, and the polished glassware reflected a strange tension no one could quite name. She stood near the corner, clutching the last tray she would carry that night, her hands trembling not from the weight of the dishes but from the weight of something far heavier, centuries of silence pressing against her chest. She knew this moment would define her. If she stayed quiet, she would remain invisible, another shadow in the corner of wealth and privilege. But if she spoke, she would risk everything. The millionaire sat alone now, the crowd of admirers gone, leaving only the emptiness of a man surrounded by everything except the one thing he longed for: healing. His gaze was fixed on the glass in front of him, but his eyes carried a storm. She saw it clearly, because storms recognized one another. And then, she stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded violently. She spoke words she had never rehearsed, words that seemed to rise from every wound she had ever carried. "I can fix your broken heart." The room froze. The few remaining guests turned in disbelief. A poor black girl, dressed in a simple uniform, daring to speak such words to a man of untouchable power, it was unthinkable. For a moment, silence was louder than any sound. Then, whispers. Disbelief. Laughter. Some shook their heads, muttering about audacity, about knowing one's place. And he looked at her, not with anger, but with something far more complicated. Pain. Confusion. Curiosity. But before he could respond, the system around them did. The manager rushed forward, his face red with fury. He pulled her aside sharply, his voice low but venomous. How dare you? Do you know who he is? Do you know what you've done? He threatened her job, her future, her very right to stand in that room. Others joined in, sneering, dismissing her as delusional, calling her boldness arrogance. And still, she stood. The injustice poured over her like fire. She had done nothing but speak truth from her heart, yet the world reacted as if she had committed a crime. All she had offered was compassion, a promise of healing, and for that, she was ridiculed, threatened, silenced. But the storm inside her refused to be quiet. Her voice rose, not in anger, but in raw honesty. She spoke of pain, the kind that comes from being unseen, unheard, unwanted. She spoke of the weight of living in a world where your worth is measured by skin and status. She spoke of how she, a poor black girl who had nothing, understood the brokenness that even the wealthiest could not escape. And with each word, the air grew heavier. Guests shifted uncomfortably, as though truth itself was too sharp to sit with. The millionaire, however, did not move. His eyes were fixed on her, locked with a focus that unsettled everyone else in the room. And then, it happened. Security was called. 2 men in dark suits approached, their hands firm, their presence meant to intimidate. The manager demanded she be removed immediately. She felt hands grip her arms, pulling her away as though she were dangerous, as though words were weapons too sharp to be allowed in such a place. The injustice burned deeper than ever. She hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened, hadn't harmed anyone, yet here she was, treated like a criminal for daring to exist beyond silence. The millionaire rose from his seat. His voice finally cut through the chaos. Stop. The room went quiet. For the first time, he spoke, not to dismiss her, not to laugh, but to command the world around him to pause. He looked at the men holding her, then at her. And in that silence, something shifted. He didn't free her with wealth, or with promises. He simply acknowledged her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had. But the damage was done. She was dragged outside, her job lost, her dignity torn in front of strangers. Standing on the cold pavement, she felt both broken and unbreakable. Because though they had tried to silence her, the words had already been spoken. The truth had already been heard. And the world reacts violently when truth dares to speak from the margins. In the days that followed, her story spread. Not through headlines, not through powerful networks, but through whispers, through people who had seen that moment and couldn't shake it. Some mocked her, calling her foolish. Others dismissed her as desperate. But there were those who understood that a girl with nothing had stood before a man with everything and reminded him that wealth could not fix what only humanity could heal. The backlash came swiftly. She was labeled out of line, unprofessional, angry. Social media twisted her story, reducing her boldness into caricature. She faced the double weight of being poor and black in a society eager to remind her that both identities were dangerous when paired with courage. But something else was happening, quietly, beneath the noise. The millionaire, who had lived his life surrounded by admiration, began to see the cracks more clearly than ever. Her words haunted him. "I can fix your broken heart." He replayed them, over and over, realizing that what she had offered was not arrogance, but truth. Because no amount of power had healed him. No amount of wealth had filled the emptiness. And now, he couldn't ignore the fact that the only person who dared to confront his brokenness was the one society told him to overlook. Meanwhile, she faced her darkest hours. Bills piled higher, opportunities vanished, and the fear of being blacklisted from even the smallest jobs loomed. She walked streets where eyes followed her with judgment, where voices reminded her of what she had lost. Yet through it all, she carried a strange kind of strength, the knowledge that she had spoken when silence was demanded. And then came the breaking point. One night, as she walked home, the shadows returned. A group of men followed, their voices cruel, their laughter sharp. She knew this danger well, the kind that came not from wealth, but from hate itself. They cornered her near an alley, words dripping with venom, reminding her of every label society had branded her with. She felt fear rise like fire in her chest, but she also felt something else, defiance. Before the worst could unfold, headlights cut through the dark. A car pulled up, and out stepped the last person she expected, the millionaire. He had followed the whispers, traced the story, and now stood before her in the very place where society tried hardest to erase her. The men scattered, their cruelty dissolving in the face of power they respected. But he didn't come to rescue her with status. He came because he finally understood. For the first time in his life, he looked at someone the world deemed invisible and saw not weakness, not poverty, not color, but truth. The truth that she had dared to speak when no one else would. The truth that healing hearts had nothing to do with money and everything to do with courage. In that moment, their lives collided fully. She stood battered by the weight of injustice, he stood shattered by the emptiness of privilege, and together, they faced a question that society itself could not answer. What happens when the invisible refuses to remain unseen? The world had already tried to silence her once. Would it succeed again? Or would this moment ignite something far greater than both of them? The night air was heavy with possibility, the kind that comes just before history bends. And as she stood there, heart pounding, future uncertain, one thing was clear: this was no longer just about her. It was about every voice that had been silenced, every injustice ignored, every heart broken by a system that pretended to be whole. And she knew, this was only the beginning. The night that began with silence ended with something far louder, truth refusing to be buried. For her, the journey did not close with applause or recognition. There was no instant reward, no fairy tale ending. Instead, there was the long, heavy work of carrying both the pain of humiliation and the pride of resistance. She walked away knowing she had lost her job, her security, and the fragile stability she had fought so hard to keep. Yet, she also carried something that no one could take, a voice that had been heard. The millionaire, too, was changed. For years, he had lived surrounded by admiration, yet isolated in grief. People praised his wealth, envied his power, but no one had dared to touch the broken places inside him. Until her. Until the girl who had nothing, who risked everything, who spoke words the world mocked, but words that were true. In her defiance, he saw courage. In her pain, he saw reflection. For the first time, he realized that healing didn't come from status or money. It came from seeing and being seen, from acknowledging the humanity in those the world chooses to overlook. But this story was never just about two people. It was about the imbalance that shaped their worlds. One, punished for speaking, the other protected by privilege. One, invisible until she forced herself to be seen. The other, visible always, yet empty inside. Their meeting exposed what society so often hides, that the lines dividing dignity and despair are not drawn by fate, but by injustice. Her words, "I can fix your broken heart," echoed far beyond that room. They became a question for everyone who heard the story. Could healing ever be possible in a world still broken by racism, where courage is punished, and silence is demanded from those who suffer most? For her, the path forward was uncertain. She would struggle, yes. She would face doors that slammed shut and systems that refused to change. But she would also walk taller, carrying the knowledge that her voice mattered, that her courage mattered, even when the world told her otherwise. And for us, the audience, the story lingers. Because her experience is not rare. It is not confined to one restaurant, one city, one moment in time. It is the story of millions who live unseen, unheard, unprotected. It is the story of workers dismissed for speaking, of children judged before they grow, of communities forced to prove their worth again and again. It is a story that repeats, again and again, until someone finally listens. So we must ask ourselves, how many more hearts will be broken before justice becomes more than a word? How many voices must be silenced before we recognize their truth? How many lives must be diminished before society chooses to see every person as fully human? Her story is both a warning and a challenge. A warning that silence allows injustice to thrive. A challenge that healing, true healing, only begins when we dare to see one another without labels, without hierarchy, without fear. This was her stand. Her risk. Her truth. Now the question is, what will we do with it?